The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents a review of a discussion between Matt Dillahunty and Ray Comfort on Does the Gospel Message Make Sense? So, today I come to you with a heavy, tired heart and brain and body. Because years ago, Ray Comfort called into the Atheist Experience and we had a conversation. And then a couple of years after that, he and I agreed to do a debate on a Christian radio station in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And he showed up and just said, "Hey, I don't have any interest in debating or proving that God exists. I just love Matt and don't want him to go to hell." Cool. Unfortunately, that didn't go over well with the producers of the radio station, the people driving around in car, because I showed up with actual arguments and evidence and a desire to actually have a discussion. And Ray showed up with no arguments, no evidence, and just a desire to preach. He just wanted to tell me the gospel, even though we were supposed to be debating whether or not, a God exists. And I swore then that I'd never debate Ray again. I also have said many times that I genuinely like Ray. In the minimal interactions that we've had, he makes me laugh. He seems like a genuinely nice person. I don't have any hatred or malice in my heart for him, even now, even after this most recent thing. But the modern day debates came to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in having a discussion with Ray?" And at first I was reluctant because I was like, I said I wouldn't debate the guy again, but I guess if we're just going to have a discussion, if we can make it about something like the gospel message, rather than getting into his horrible misunderstandings about evolution, I think I could be persuaded to do that. And they reached out to Ray, and Ray agreed, and we did it this past Wednesday. The debate, the video's on Modern Day Debates channel. It's also on my channel. If you're here watching this as part of the Atheist Debates Patreon project, and you're a patron, you have access to it already. And it should be available to everybody in the public within a couple days. But I haven't done reviews for the last couple of debates because honestly, I don't think that there was much in those debates. The team debate that I did with Tom Jump, and then the debate I did against Jonathan Sheffield, there wasn't enough there to really dig in on, although I will be going back to do it because there are certain instances there to pull out. But I wanted to say that I went into this with discussion with Ray with the best intentions, and in all sincerity, I came up with an opening statement that I thought was about as honest of a look at the does the gospel message make sense question as possible. My opening statement said, hey, we're not going to try and reconcile Easter accounts. I'm not going to go after every little thing in the gospel. I'm not worried about genealogy or historicity. I'm not worried about whether or not there is a God. I just mean, what did I understand the gospel message to be? And does that message make sense? And I covered things like what sin is, crimes against God, and then original sin and the problem with that, and then inherited sin, and then the issue with the blood magic rituals and burning and sacrificing animals, and Jesus becoming a special case sacrifice. And the question, of course, is why can't God just forgive? If he's the one who's making the rules, and he can forgive you if you accept that he killed himself as a sacrifice to himself, then why can't he just forgive you without that? Surely if God knows the minds and hearts of everyone, then he can look into the mind and heart of everyone and say, there's the type of person I would like to have with me in eternity, and there's the type of person over there that does not. It's all capricious. It's all just, when people say you're saved by, as an exercise of grace through faith, they're basically talking about God decides whether or not he's going to save you, and it's up to God. So if God's ultimate goal was to have a whole bunch of people spend eternity with him, why not create those people in eternity with him from the get-go and save all of this stuff running around and all these people who are going to be destined to spend eternity in hell and all that? What's the necessity for that? Why is it necessary to create a bunch of people and then torture them forever? It's one of the reasons why some versions of Christianity have something called annihilation theory, which is the notion that people like me, or let me say, someone who dies outside of the grace of God, which may or may not be me, depends on which person you talk to. I have pastors who tell me they were looking forward to seeing me in heaven because once saved, always saved. But if a person dies outside of the grace of God, they just cease to exist. That's annihilation theory. I've been told that Billy Graham was an adherent of annihilation theory, although he did preach about hell as well. So it's not as simple and straightforward as possible. And so my entire discussion about this topic was, what is the goal? Because if you're God and the goal is to get some people around you, you can just do that. You know, why go through this incredibly complicated billions of years of process in order to get something that you could do? And the example I said was like, it would be saying, I really want a ham sandwich with Gouda cheese on a sweet Hawaiian roll. So I'm going to start by putting a bunch of people in a grocery store and letting them experiment. And, you know, I'm not really going to interact with them at all. And whoever gets it right, whoever gets the ham sandwich right, those are the people that I'm going to rescue. And everybody else, I'm just going to beat the crap out of. That's kind of what this is. Ray, though, came with a completely different opening. And throughout the discussion, Ray essentially just said that God is axiomatic. I'm not quite sure that he necessarily fully understands what axiomatic means, but I think what he means is that God is self-evident, because he repeatedly accused me of, in fact, knowing that a God exists. And of course, I don't know that a God exists. I don't believe that a God exists. I would have to believe that there was a God exist in order to have any hope of knowing that a God exists, because knowledge is a subset of belief. And it's weird that Ray can talk about non-believers and yet claim that everybody knows. If everybody knows, then everybody must also believe, unless you're not using know in the sense of knowledge. And it could be that. It could be that they're saying, you know God exists in the same way that you're aware that the sky is blue. The problem is, then there wouldn't be anybody who believed or failed to believe that the sky was blue. I mean, if you know it, if you're aware of it, if it counts as knowledge, you're done. And Ray, of course, tried to jump to evolution during this debate. And I held him off of that because, you know, it's why would you pull that out? We're sitting here trying to discuss the gospel message, the one thing that you wanted to address the first time we tried to debate. And you, when I tell you to please stop, Ray, when I tell you to please stop claiming that you know what's in my head, because you're wrong, you're bad at it, you're terrible at it. And it looks silly for you to, well, how would it be if I just showed up in the debate and said, I'm right, you know I'm right? That's it, I have nothing more to say. I'm right. You know I'm right. Well, you can keep pretending that you don't know I'm right, but you know I'm right. So Ray actually starts off, when he's sharing his gospel message with me by saying,
I believe you're in terrible danger, and I believe you don't believe that. And if I can convince you that you are in terrible danger, I'm doing you the ultimate favor.
Now, it's interesting that right there he says that he believes I'm in terrible danger, and that he believes that I don't believe that, which means that he seems to believe that I don't believe that there's a God, and yet later on he repeatedly accuses me of knowing that there is a God, to the point where I have to ask him to stop. But his entire thing here is that the gospel, does the gospel message make sense? And he thinks that the best way to demonstrate this is just to share the gospel message with me, and that's what he does. That's his entire opening argument. There is no argument there. He's just decided to share the gospel message with me. So let's ask this. Rather than going into a word-by-word deconstruction of his 10-minute opening, you're free to watch it, and I'd recommend it. Let's do this. If Ray agrees that I don't believe that I'm in terrible danger, and presumably that I don't believe that there's actually a God, then how can he say later that he knows? But if he thinks the best way to demonstrate that the gospel message makes sense is to share the gospel message with me, and when he's done with his opening, not only have I not agreed with him, not converted, but I've been able to demonstrate that he hasn't actually done anything to show that it makes sense. As a matter of fact, literally all he did was preach. And throughout the entire debate, it was one assertion after another with no founding and no understanding of where the burden of proof rests or anything. Ray doesn't even know how to show that whether or not something does make sense. That is the biggest problem with this debate. It's also the reason why I've said mean things about Ray, because if you don't understand how to show whether or not something makes sense, then of course you're going to buy into something like the gospel message, because you don't have a mechanism to tell whether or not something's likely to be true, whether or not it's a good idea, anything else. And the proof of this is that Ray agreed to come on and have this discussion, did not hold up his end of the discussion, and thought that a good plan was to just share the gospel message with me. I could have, once his opening statement was over, simply say, if that made sense, I would accept it. If it was a good plan for you to share the gospel with me to show that it made sense, then I would have accepted it. You would be right and you would win this debate. But I don't accept that. It still doesn't make sense. I've stated how and why, and you've provided me nothing to go off of. Therefore, you lose. If you think your plan, your best plan to demonstrate that something makes sense, is to throw darts at a dartboard, trusting that God's going to help you hit a bullseye, and none of them hit the board, then we have prima facie evidence that your good plan isn't a good plan. And if you don't know what a good plan is, if you keep coming up with what you think is a good plan, and it's clearly a bad plan, then how could you ever say that you're convinced that God's plan is a good plan that makes sense? You don't have any tools to measure with. Your tools are flawed. And so this debate was over shortly after Ray began talking. Because at least with his case, now it doesn't show that the Bible or the gospel message doesn't make sense, but it does show that Ray is not a person who is equipped in any fashion to have a discussion about whether or not it makes sense, because he cannot identify a good plan from a bad plan on his own. And he will not accept the input of people who've spent a lifetime studying how to tell the difference between a good plan and a bad plan, because unless they also happen to agree with his foregone conclusion, because he wants to begin by believing first and then living it, and it'll all prove out and make sense that way. And it's all because Ray is really concerned with sex. Sex. It was a Bible verse about adultery and lusting in his heart. He went on to talk about prostitution. And I asked something like, well, what's wrong with prostitution? And his response was to say that, did I say there was anything wrong with prostitution? It'll be interesting to see if my what's wrong with prostitution shows up in a future Living Waters Ministries video, because I look forward to that. Anyway, I don't see much reason for me or anyone else to engage with Ray again. I'm not going to go down the route that a lot of my friends do and say that he's a liar, although I think we caught him and exposed him as being at least dishonest in his answering at one point. And it was not a big deal, but it was worth pointing out because he had just said that he didn't think he had lied. Since becoming a Christian, he doesn't think he's knowingly ever lied. And within seconds of that, we caught him essentially acting as if he heard the question and then later admitting he didn't hear the question, which means that his first answer was dishonest or less than honest and forthright. And I could have added on to that by pointing out that he's 20 years older than me and doesn't have an ounce of gray, which means he's got some miraculous secret or isn't being honest about his actual appearance. But that's not something that I consider in the same category as a lie. It was just a bit of fun that Ray and I shared before the debate started, because I told him how he was in a magic trick in my act, and he said that he was magic too. And I'm like, yeah, because you're 20 years older than me and have way less gray. But I don't think that there'll be any reason to engage with Ray again. I don't recommend other people do it. I'll go back and review some other debates, and I will take questions, and people will probably find different things within this discussion with Ray to comment on. But I think I'm fine. I showed up. I addressed the topic. I addressed the topic honestly. I gave the benefit of the doubt as best I could, and I sat there and got preached at and told that I know what I don't know. And just all kinds of, it's kind of, oh, I love Matt, and I count Matt a friend, and he treats me so nice, and blah 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 blah. And it's all a setup so that he can sit there, and then when he does something outrageous, and I show any emotion at all, the people in the chat can be like, "Oh, look how angry Matt is. He's been convicted by the Holy Spirit." No, I've been annoyed by somebody who doesn't understand basic reasoning. We'll see you next time. Bye bye. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.